Alrighty, welcome back, everybody. This is Stephanie, your community manager. You can't see me, but you should be able to hear me. Up right now is API tips and tricks with Steve, Phil, and the Aaron, Roll20 moderator. I'm going to disappear now and let these gentlemen teach you a little bit about Roll20's API. Have fun, everybody.
Well, thank you all for coming out at what's probably the wee hours of the morning for those of you in the US. And so we appreciate you taking the time to experience Roll20 in true con fashion, which is at ridiculously stupid hours. So let's jump in right off the bat with introducing everyone. I'm Steve K. I'm a developer for Roll20, as is Phil. You want to mention how much you loved the API before you came to work at Roll20?
I actually hadn't used the API before I started working here. I just had a Plus account. Like once I got upgraded, it's like, oh my gosh! If I had realized how amazing the API was, I would have upgraded a long time ago.
And quite the opposite would be a name those of you who enjoy the API are probably very familiar with. Our moderator there, and who is our API aficionado.
Hello.
Would you like to introduce yourself and talk about how you got into Roll20 and API scripting?
Sure. So something that would probably be surprising to most people is that the API is not what originally got me to be a mentor or pro member on Roll20. I actually started off as a pro subscriber to get to the transmogrifier. It was a year later before I actually started writing API scripts. And that's now more of my passion for Roll20. I actually enjoy writing scripts more than I enjoy playing. So if only I had time to do that all the time.
So let's take a moment to talk about what an API is. Aaron, do you want to talk about what the general idea of an API is and what it's supposed to do?
Yeah, so an API, an application programming interface, is a way that you can write software that talks to another larger piece of software and instructs it in how to do various tasks you're interested in.
Yeah, and so what that means for Roll20 users is it's a way of getting at the nitty-gritty, behind-the-scenes information of your games and creating tools for Roll20 to do things for your games that don't currently exist. Roll20 is designed to be system agnostic, where everything you could possibly think of to play. And I know Nolan said in the opening ceremony that there's some games that don't work on Roll20, but I'm taking that as a personal challenge. In the game that I'm going to be running later this afternoon, I'm running Dread, that game that you run with the Jenga tower in Roll20. If you want to find out how I do it, go subscribe. So, So let's get into the specifics of like what might you use the Roll20 API to do, and we've prepped a demo game in order to show off what I think are like three general categories to think of that would be like how to usefully apply the Roll20 API. And the first way that I think of is kind of creating tools that aren't that Roll20 doesn't already have. And we're going to start off with one of Aaron's own scripts. We're going to take a look at a token mod. And what are I have a token loaded in there. What are some commands offhand that Phil could show the audience to start mangling our token?
Oh my gosh.
Putting you on the spot.
Putting me on the spot. Well, man, if only Jen Kitty was here, because that's who I wrote that script for originally.
I remember her badgering you about it.
So I most often use it for things like, for example, putting a particular status marker on a token. Say, example, you've got a ranger who's got Hunter's Mark. Whenever they cast it, they can put a mark on a particular token, and then they get an extra amount of damage in D&D 5e. So it's pretty easy to write a token mod script that will or token mod command that will put that token on, put that status marker on, or take it off at will. don't know where I would send that from.
So Phil's driving the bus for us, and he's opened up the demo game, and is going to do some driving, show off the scripts for us, and so Token Mod is this is an API tool, right, that you've created in order for you to, for the most part, you're going to want to set these up as set macros where you can include some sort of modification to the game to happen automatically. Like some of the original ones that Riley created just as examples was to march a guy across a screen at like timed intervals. Some people did where the darkness of the dynamic lighting closes in, like to represent a torch burning out if the adventurers don't make it, you know, through the dungeon in enough time. So, but that can be used in a couple of other really cool, more focused ways. And one of the ones that it's always spectacular to see is when it adds some sort of graphical effect or some sort of visual audio experience to the game. And one of the ones that we featured previously that I actually just fell in love with was a script called Blood and Honor, which when a token takes a certain amount of damage, which is in that red bubble, and again, I'm seeing the donations pour in, guys. Thank you so much for donating. So if you could maim our fine adventurer bounty hunter, Phil, and do some damage to him and march him around the screen, what this script does is as they take damage, they just start bleeding. And I think that for games that focus on the danger and mortality of action and adventure, it does a really good job of, without you even having to think of it as the game master, adding the consequences of violence right there in graphic, really ugly, messy details right there onto the screen. So I think it's a pretty awesome script. And the third way that I think the API is exceptionally useful is, so the first was creating new tools. The second one was kind of graphically and, you know, sensorily interacting with the environment. And then the third way is handling role-playing game system mechanics or any tabletop mechanics that Roll20 doesn't handle by default. And I've seen everything from charts and tables in complicated games, like for the old Marvel role-playing game system that had like a percentile chart. You know, we had a script that did that. I'm pretty sure Aaron wrote one that was a calendar for a particular set of games. So complex mechanics that don't otherwise fit. And one of our most popular ones is to handle the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game, Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and I believe it's Force and Destiny, the character sheet for that. And do you think you could pop open that character sheet, Phil, and make a roll? And what it does is it outputs dice that obviously are non-traditional and don't normally fit with, you know, the Roll20 system. Being system agnostic doesn't have any way of anticipating those dice. So it is a way to take mechanics like crazy dice or maybe you know, interesting things that don't actually normally exist in traditional role-playing games, a certain idea or mystique or cool feature that Roll20 couldn't have predicted as being something important to tabletop gamers, and creating an avenue to get it into your game and make it work. It also solves a lot of problems for even some pretty traditional games that have some complex rolling mechanics that just I think personally Roll20 is incredibly robust, but some of them still shoot right on by us. You know, you roll 3 dice and you only match 2s. You know, like that's not something that Roll20 can predict what you'd need. So, do you have any ideas on that, Aaron, about like what makes the API so awesome?
Yeah, so like you were saying, writing scripts that can support sort of non-mainstream games that have special mechanics. A good example is Cthulhu Tech has a mechanic where you roll so many dice in a pool, and then you either take the highest numbered rolled or the highest collection of the same number or the highest run, and that's not really something that's easy to set up in regular dice mechanics. But you can write an API script that handles that beautifully, and so suddenly it makes everyone playing Cthulhu Tech dice or Cthulhu Tech. It gives them a way of playing that more efficiently and getting straight into the role play and not spending all their time organizing dice and counting and adding.
So, I mean, obviously, both of us love the API. Like I had said in the previous in the introduction that I got the job here at Roll20 essentially because I wrote an API script. It was pre-character sheets, and I had written a script that took every attribute from the game that I was playing and input it onto a character. And just created the empty attributes and prompts of what's this person's this, what's this person's this, so that way you could fill them all in and then have and then add macros for all the dice rolls for that particular game. And I had come from a SQL programming background, but with no JavaScript training at all before I decided to get into the Roll20 API and self-taught myself. And it sounds a lot scarier than it is, but we'll get into a lot more of that later. So let's talk about how now, rather than the rough Wild West days of when the API first started, hopefully you don't need to know much about coding at all in order to make use of API scripts, get them into your games, and start taking use of these really useful tools that other people made. So, Phil, if you could drive us to a game details page where we're going to move into the API settings page. So this page exists on all of your games if you are a pro subscriber. And you can get into this at any time, add, tweak, and use your API scripts. Once you have jumped into the tab, into the API page, you're going to have a default tab right from the beginning that's our API library. And these are our one-click install scripts. And just browsing through them, you can see, for the most part, all of the commands, what the script is supposed to be doing, and how to make use of it in your game. We've broken it up into a handful of categories. And this feature is relatively new. It was in our most recent update, so I'm going to guess that was less than 2 months ago. And even now, we have scripts pouring in every day for use in this one-click install library. So I'm pretty excited about the feature. I think it's opening up the floodgates for a lot of people who, because of some technical boundaries, wouldn't have ever even tried the API. We're trying to demystify that and make it a useful tool for all of our pro subscribers. So we have some scripts installed from that manner, which if you could add add a few scripts for us, Phil. And then we also are going to show you a dark place of the internet called the API script repository. It's a GitHub repository. And just let me grab the link for that. And why don't you talk a little bit about that, Aaron?
Okay. So the API script repository is stored in GitHub. GitHub is an online location where you can have Git repos, and Git is a source code management system. It's a place where you can store the code that goes into your scripts and then keep track of changes to it and see how it changes over time, and then make it publicly available. Various different script authors on Roll20 will go through and write a script and submit it to be included in the repository. There's a couple of requirements detailed out there in the README that tell you how to set it up and what to name various things. And when it gets included, then it ends up showing up to be installed through this system you're going to talk about now.
As have
Also, I think my internet is having problems.
I think it's Steve's internet. You sound fine.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, so hi, it's Stephanie. We are having some buffering problems in chat. It was reported. I think what's probably happening is the lowest common denominator is affecting the stream, because now we'll see when if it helps. But we will do the best we can, everybody, to make it work. So hang tight with us, and hopefully by the end of 24 hours, we'll be pros.
So, Phil, what have you written lately for the API?
Well, I've fixed a bunch of, or not a bunch, but I've fixed bugs in the back end that add to the API. I spend so much time working on the API, I don't get a whole lot of time to work like with it. Like, so I haven't written very many, at least not like public scripts. I've written some for my personal games.
Yeah, with the new changes to the way the API can be deployed, I've had to go through and rewrite a lot of my scripts, and I have over 53 of them. So it takes a long time to make changes to all of them. I'm still working on some systems. Oh, I think we have Steve back now.
Sorry about that.
Maybe.
About the GitHub.
Maybe not. Oh,
Uh-oh.
there you are.
It looks good. Hello?
Your
Hello.
internet. Well, it's getting better.
Getting better.
So let's talk about the GitHub repository, and if you could, while I'm having internet issues, talk how you would get a script from the repository into if you so chose.
So after writing it and hopefully doing a sufficient amount of testing to where you felt like it was good enough for the public eye, so to speak, you'd need to make your own fork off of the official Roll20 repo and add your script in. So you're going to need to provide a description of it in a special file called script.json. There's details about it out there, but it basically will tell you who wrote it and what its intention is and how to use it, and some of the subsystems it deals with, so you can check to see if it conflicts with other things. So you would commit that into the repo along with your script at some version and send a pull request up to Roll20 on their GitHub repo. And then Steve or Phil would go through and look at it and probably try it out and make sure that it's not got some major flaws, and then merge it into the live repo. And then it'd become available for everyone.
Name going to be
Hey, Steve. I'm going to try just turning your camera off and seeing if maybe you have better luck when you're not just streaming video and you can just talk over.
Maybe.
I don't know if you heard me. Steve, did you hear what I said?
Hello?
Hey, try turning off your camera and seeing if maybe you can just transmit sound.
Let's see if this.
Thanks for your patience, everybody. This is a first-time experience for us. So,
Don't you normally?
So one of the most interesting scripts I've written recently, just sort of as a one-off, I have a couple of rangers in a party that I run on Sundays, and they were going through the mountains, and I wanted to do something a little bit extra special for the ranger doing his tracking, because that doesn't ever get sort of screen time, so to speak. So I drug a bunch of tracks onto the GM layer and colored them a particular set of colors: pink for goblins, I guess, and green for the guys they were tracking. And when he made his tracking check, I had a little API script set up that I could run that would push those down to the map layer. So suddenly these sort of glowing footprints showed up so he could follow the tracks. I thought that was a lot of fun. Hopefully I can productize that and ship it off into the repo soon.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like Lord of the Rings War in the North, whenever the Rangers find something, if you ever played that.
One that I did was for a trap room where the person in the room couldn't see the traps, but everybody outside the room could. And to mimic that in Roll20, I had 2 copies of the room. One where the player in the room was empty, and one where everybody else was viewing that had all the traps in it. And the script would mimic the token's movement so that his token would move inside of the room that they could see, so that they could tell him where to go while he's wandering blindly through this room full of traps.
You're not going to believe this, but I actually have a script for that called Twins.
Oh, really? Well, there was a bunch of other stuff to automate the trap movements that would move back and forth, or like in a line, and then like flame jets and stuff. So it was all tied together. But, yeah.
I just popped back in so that people could actually see you, because it's set up for 3. And
Oh.
while we figure this out, so you guys keep going, and I'll just sit here.
So, Phil, what would you most like to write for an API script if you had some free time? Got any pet projects?
It's hard trying to find something that's not in the list of 50 that you've already written.
I've got Google Docs and Google Docs full of things. I spent about 10 hours designing a realistic currency simulator for multiple kingdoms with one of the people in the community that I'd really like to write at some point.
So you're just writing the economy into the API?
Yeah, so I like the idea that whenever the PCs come into town and offload 10,000 gold pieces, suddenly milk jumps up to 100 gold pieces a bottle or whatever, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Why don't you guys go ahead and just continue to go through whatever else you were going to show in Roll20. We still have about 45 minutes left on your stuff.
Yeah.
And we'll figure out what's up with Steve. We might kick him out, because I think that's probably going to save our stream now. So
Okay.
The next thing we had here on the list was writing your own scripts. Like, what is your process?
Yeah. Okay. So writing your own scripts. I think, is this the thing I prepared a presentation for, or just what's my process?
I think this might be the thing we had the presentation for.
All right. And I can't actually see it, so you have to tell me what page we're on.
We're on the overview.
All right, so scripting overview. So as we've mentioned before, Roll20's API is written in JavaScript. We're not going to talk about how to write JavaScript, but there's plenty of tutorials out there on the internet, some of which are linked off of Roll20's wiki. As I was talking earlier about that Ranger script that I wrote for doing footprints, and that's a good example of something that you could just write as sort of a one-off. You don't have to write a big grand system to use the API to get something out of writing your own scripts. It could be just some small script that does one little something. Adds some special effects whenever the players move across some threshold, or that that script for rangers, when they track, it pops, moves some particular graphic on one page. And you can do that in a couple of different lines, and it doesn't take much experience at all. Everyone knows it's 2 o'clock here, or 3 o'clock rather. Anyway, so let's move to the next page there. So should be seeing procedural. So a lot of people, when they start writing software, they learn procedural programming. And procedural programming, it's kind of like the recipe for your favorite dish. You have a bunch of steps you're going to follow. You start with ingredients, you follow those steps, and when you're done, you have cooked something. Well, procedural programs work the same way. You start with a collection of data of some kind. You run a bunch of functions on it, and when you're done, you have some output data, and that's the end. And that's great for processing data, but it isn't as good for interactive systems. So move along. So we have event-driven software is sort of, I would say, kind of the ideal way of dealing with like a user interface, something where you have interactions. You're not just starting and running to the end like a procedural. You need to deal with things as they come up. So sometimes I tell people it's kind of like Isaac Asimov's Foundation, if you've ever read that series. There's a certain set of circumstances that when those occur, it wakes up and it does some prescribed task. So let's see. For example, if you move a token, or you roll a die, or someone enters an API command, then that would cause an event, and your script can go through and handle that event in some way. Maybe printing a particular message, or changing the color of the token, or something. Move along. So the facilities for an API script. When you're sitting down, you've got some things to work with. For the most part, Roll20's API is organized into a collection of objects, a bunch of events, and then some additional glue that sort of binds everything together. So Roll20 has its own objects that are a little bit different than your regular JavaScript object. They all have a get method for pulling data out of them, a set method for applying data to them. So, for example, you've got graphic objects that you'd use for representing tokens or for maps. You've got characters and their associated attributes and abilities, handouts, pages, etc. All of those things are something you might create or manipulate in order to get some effect. All right. So, for example, we saw that blood and honor script earlier, where you move a token around and it's taken damage, so it starts leaving a trail of blood. That's creating graphics on the map layer that look like blood as as it gets the event for moving the token. So generally speaking, events are what drives your script. So whenever a player moves their token around, or there's an event that tells you that. Whenever someone starts a new turn, there's another event for that. So events have a name that tell you what happened, but they also have an object that's associated with them that tells you what object that event occurred to. So when you change an object, there's an event and the object that was changed. And there's another regular JavaScript object that tells you what that Roll20 object was like before you changed it. So for example, if you change the name of a token, you'd have the token object and it has its name, but you have a previous object that has the old name on it, so you can compare the changes and take actions appropriately. Maybe if someone's hit points go below 0, you want to move them back up to 0 and then set some status, so you could look at those things. All right, so objects have 3 basic events associated with them. There's an add event that occurs whenever someone drags a token onto the map, or whenever they create a new rollable table or something of that nature, you'll get an add event for that object. There's a change event whenever people make modifications to a particular object, and then there's a destroy event when they delete them. So if you remove a monster from, if you remove a monster from the tabletop, then you get a destroy event. There's also a chat event where whenever someone enters a message into the chat window, so for example, if they emote as some character, or they speak as a character, or roll some dice, or even type an API command, you'll get a chat event, and it will tell you the circumstances under which that occurs. It'll show you the various dice that they rolled as part of it, and what the command type was, who issued it, who they were speaking as, all those sorts of things. Additionally, you have a couple other facilities for your script. You've got access to the underscore.js library, which gives you a bunch of functional programming primitives, which can really speed things up for you. You've got a bunch of other utilities like checking the type of an object or doing some templating or even just copying objects. Additionally, recently the API server has been updated so where it's now using JavaScript ES6, so you can take advantage of a lot of really great new features in JavaScript like classes, block level scoping, or JavaScript promises. Next slide. So, limitations and gotchas. There's a couple of things that we continuously run across when people are just starting out writing API scripts. The first thing is the API is server-side, so it runs on a computer that's quite far away from the players' computers. It's kind of action at a distance. Something happens, the players do something on the virtual tabletop, and then events fire off, and this server somewhere else deals with those events and then sends responses back. So a lot of people initially will want to do things like, whenever a player selects this token, do something, but there isn't really an event for that. That's on the GUI side. We don't get something for that on the API side. So another thing people run into is that the API is very event-driven. And so there's the expectation that whenever in the API you make some changes to an object, that there'll be an event that goes along with it. For example, if you in the Blood and Honor script, if you create a token, create a graphic, there's an expectation that there's going to be some event that comes along and tells you that some other script has created a graphic. But that is not actually the case. There are some ways around that. But generally speaking, there aren't events coming from the API, with the exception of sending chat messages, which will cause a chat event and you have to deal with. That's another gotcha. Another thing is you cannot create marketplace content with the API. Artists, and you wouldn't want, if you were an artist, you wouldn't want to be creating, want to have a script running out there that's creating all of your content without actually having purchased it. So that's not possible. But it might become possible later. Who knows? There are also a couple of subsystems that are sort of minimal. You can see cards, you can see what cards are in someone's hand, but you can't actually adjust those things currently. Next slide. So if you want to know more about how to write scripts, there are a couple of places you can go. You can go to the wiki, where we have a lot of reference information on API objects and functions. And the community contributes, little cookbook things and functions you can use. There's also the forum, which is extremely active and has a very helpful community. There's lots of discussions there, a lot of little, code snippets on how to do this or that. And you can also contact me on there. I'm always on there and very helpful, hopefully. So that's what I've got for that. So where are we at now? So as far as process goes, just sort of off the cuff, I like to sit down and write sort of an outline of what I want some script to do. So, for example, with that Ranger script, I sat down and I wrote, all right, well, I want to be able to flip something from the GM layer, to the map layer. And I wanted a command to do that. So I start by writing those things down, and then I'll go through and create event handlers that will receive the particular command message I wanted, parse it, make sure it's the right one, and then create objects that I need or find them and just make some adjustments. So tinkering, I guess, is the best way to learn and get started, I guess.
Doing is definitely the best way to do it, because like before I started, I had no experience, but I usually watch the bug forums and I'm constantly having to try and recreate issues that people have. And a lot of times that happens with the API scripts. So I learned very quickly about the API because people were having problems with it. So I'm tinkering with not only my own code, but with theirs. And when you're digging around trying to find what's broken, that's a really quick way to learn. which is convenient because when you're first starting out, everything is going to be broken.
Yeah, totally. So I always encourage people to find existing scripts and make little tweaks to them. There was actually a discussion today on the community, the API forum, about that calendar script that I wrote that Steve mentioned. There have been at least 3 or 4 people have made modifications for various different calendar systems, and some of them are looking pretty awesome. The one today, it looked pretty darn professional. The kind of thing you'd expect to see in Outlook or something.
All running inside of Roll20.
That's right. I thought about re-implementing Zork in Roll20 as an API script. I just had more time. What's next on our list?
Q&A, if anybody has any API questions.
All right. Let's see.
You also have like a lot more time to kill.
Oh, how much more time do we have?
Like 40 minutes.
40 minutes. All right. Well,
we may end up doing if we're almost done and we don't have anything is putting us on a break so I can try to figure out what's wrong with the stream. But we can see if there's any questions.
All right. I will admit that I have never used Twitch before. Is it live? I don't know.
It is, yeah. Yeah. I'm in there now, but the problem is that we can't really do a Q&A because we're actually probably like 20 minutes behind live. Like I've been sitting here watching it's on page 3 of your thing right now.
Oh wow.
So, yeah. I'm not really sure how it works.
Phil, do you have any questions?
There you go.
Or Stephanie, have you ever thought of writing an API script?
I feel like I just don't have time. Oh, I haven't even thought about it. I think it did. I removed Steve and now he can't join the call again, but I don't know if we want to do that anyway. I shouldn't be the one talking right now. You guys talk. I have to figure this out.
All right. Sorry to have interrupted you, Phil.
Oh, I don't know.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing questions in the scroll back here. Obviously.
Go ahead and why don't you just wrap it up a little bit and I'll put us on a break and then we'll figure out all that other stuff.
All right. Well, I'm the Aaron. It's nice talking to you. See you in 12 hours or so on the next panel.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
All goes well. Oh, snippets. What are those and where can we find them? How many APIs are in the one-click currently and how many you think might be coming from the community in the near future? Okay, so snippets. I personally have sort of, I have standards around certain scripts that I write, and I have 2 styles of scripts that I write. I have scripts that I actually release into the repo that they have help, they have configuration. I always feel like if someone has to actually edit one of my scripts in order to configure it, that I have failed as an author. And so I always try to write really good configuration and help screens. Almost all of my scripts, you can run the primary command and add -- help to it, and it will spit out help and configuration information. But that all actually takes quite a bit of time to write. And sometimes I just want to throw together something really fast to help someone with some specific something. And so I have this other class of little API scripts I write called snippets, where I just make a very short, simple script. And those pretty much only exist on the forums. You can usually go and search, you can search the API forums for various different topics and often find a snippet for that. I also have a whole collection of them somewhere. So oftentimes I'll pull those out, modify them, and throw them on the website, on the forum. So that's snippets. How many APIs are in the one-click currently? Do you have a number for that, Phil?
Not off the top of my head, but I think it's about like 30.
Yeah, 30.
And we're adding more pretty much every week. When Steve pulls in new scripts, he's adding and updating them every week.
40-ish right now in the YAML. And it looks like there's about 140 different scripts in the repo, some of which are still copy-paste. So that probably answers that pretty well. What else is in here? All right, well.
Oh,
So I
and
guess that's
a cool
that's
tool
for
that
now.
I want to mention real quick. When you're adding something from the script library, you can add the script using the one-click install, or you can click the import button, which basically just copies the code into the custom editor for you, which makes it really easy to tinker with, even if it's something that you're adding directly from the one-click install. That's the difference between the add script and import buttons.
All right.
If you guys could just keep trying to, because we do have to kill a little bit of time, just because
Okay.
I don't know what's going to happen or when it will catch up, and
So,
so yeah, just keep trying.
Phil, did you talk about the configuration on the one-click installs?
No. So
That'd
you
probably
can,
be a good thing to go over. So one nice thing about one-click installs is it. I mentioned earlier that I feel like my scripts are not done until I've added a way of configuring them. Previous to one-click installs, we had to write all of that ourselves. Now there is a configuration system, and hopefully I can't see what you're pulling up, Phil, but I hope you've got it up now.
what is a script that has the config file with it?
Token name number has some. Group, I don't know if group in it does, but certainly token name number and bump both have those things. Monster hit dice has it as well. So the configuration system, global config, allows the script author to define in that script.json file I mentioned earlier a bunch of different keys for configuration and what valid values are for it. So for example, if you want to be able to set a particular color that something happens, the bump script that I wrote allows you to move tokens to the GM layer, but still have an invisible token on the token layer that you can move about without players seeing it, but you can see it, and it colors that invisible token based on whether or not players can see the main token. And so there's configuration on there to set what colors those are. And that is super handy for a script developer because it, for the most part, prevents you from having to write a whole bunch of code to collect that information and set it and store it, etc.
And it makes it easier on the users because it gives them a nice clean interface to enter all of this information. They don't have to know a bunch of the codes.
Right. Very right. What else? So, Phil, have you used many scripts in your games that are in the repo?
I use the token mod a lot. It's super useful for basically everything. Everything you could possibly do to a token, it lets you do it in a macro.
Yeah, pretty much the only thing I haven't implemented in it is setting who a token is controlled by, and I have a request outstanding to do that. The intent with that token was to be able to effectively set everything you could set from token properties with the GUI, but do it with the API and do it across multiple tokens at once. I have 3 or 4 token mod commands that are about 40 lines long that I use whenever I'm adding monsters that set the vision and set what the players can see and what the auras are and the name and what character it represents and binds all of the bars and everything. And that makes setup super fast.
Yeah. My players are currently going through a dungeon, so being able to constantly, and they're constantly throwing their light rocks at monsters, so I'm constantly moving the light around. So token mod makes that easy because I have a button that I can push that gives someone light or takes it away, and it makes everything move very smoothly.
One of my oldest scripts I've written is turn marker. I started that. I started writing that. That was one where I started modifying a different script. Honey Badger originally had a little token marker, sort of a script that would put a little green box around around whichever token its turn was. And one of my good friends is nearly blind, and so he had a hard time distinguishing which token's turn it was. So I actually wrote turn marker to add this big, audacious orange marker around whoever turn it was so he could get close to the screen and see where that was. And that's actually why it has options like having that spin and having auras that pulse in and out around it and everything, which was quite a lot of fun and very useful.
So if you guys can, okay, so I'll ask a question since I don't really know. Basically, oh no, I'll tell you what our plan is right now. We're gonna go until about 1:30, and then I'm going to put it on a splash screen and see. I'm gonna have you guys all leave the call. I think I'm hoping that the actual problem is just that your internet is bad, and that's why the two of you. Which is, we've like I know that in calls with all of us, we've had problems with you guys, so I'm thinking that's what it is. And so basically, we'll see if we can get the VOD quote to catch up, and then I'll kill the stream. But we'll go for another like 12 minutes. That way, we're not. Otherwise, there's going to be some time in between the next one, and I want to make sure because we're piping in people from Brazil that we're able. So my question would be, as somebody who does not know anything about coding, if I did want to do something by myself or start on my own, like what would be the best way to go about it?
All right. So for starters, you would have to learn. There's no way around learning a little bit of JavaScript. There are some really great tutorials that are easy to follow and broken up into small, manageable pieces. We linked to one of them off of the API, the wiki page for the API. So you would go through that for starters just to sort of get familiarity with the language structure. Then, honestly, I think the best way to start is to post in the forum and say, hey, I want to write this thing. What should I do? I love answering those questions. A lot of times people will come in and ask about, so for the example, that calendar thing I brought up the other day, someone popped in and asked, hey, I really wish I could write a calendar script. Here's sort of the math I'm thinking about doing in pseudocode. And so I jumped on there and I said, hey, I actually have a calendar script that you could look at for an example and dig through it. So a lot of times someone can jump in there and give you some ideas about where you could be going. And then it's nice to have a process where you're posting online, posting like where you're at currently under script, and we can make suggestions. If you have a problem, you post and say, all right, well, I can't actually get this to work. I copied this example and I made some changes and now it's not working. What I do? And so we can have that discussion online, and then everyone sort of benefits from that because there are a lot of things, a lot of gotchas just in JavaScript in general that it's nice to publicly see those things. So it encourages people who maybe are too shy to come forward and say, I've got this thing, but I can't make it work. And they can look and see, oh, other people have this same problem, and here's the solution. And it's really great.
We just got a question in chat. They said, can you talk about the difference between script worker and API?
Absolutely. So probably what you mean is sheet workers. Sheet workers are written in JavaScript as well. They are embedded in the character sheets, and they actually run on the client side. They have a very restricted scope to where they get events based on changes to a specific character sheet. So if you go into your character sheet and change the dexterity, the sheet worker will get an event that tells it that, and it can go through and make adjustments to various attributes on that character to account for those changes. So very similar, not quite the same. Hopefully, I think that would probably answer that question.
Yeah, and we have a couple more in there. I think we answered Gold's question. We're just not caught up, right, about how many API scripts there are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's one here for what makes a good first API-related project for a JavaScript novice. I mean, I think the simplest thing you could add is probably printing a message whenever someone moves a token. So that's something that you've got one event, you've got one output. All you have to do is you add in a handler for the change token, change graphic. You receive that event, you write a send chat that says this token moved. So that's really kind of the full loop on an event, an event-driven script for the API, and would give you basically everything you need to know to sort of move forward and expand from there.
You were going to read the... I was typing to Steve. We have other questions. I'm confused. Where was it?
When will care mod be available, Z Kyle?
Oh.
The unicorn script, as I like to call it, will be available after I move to Indianapolis sometime. Character mod is sort of it's the other side of the coin from token mod. It's a script I've been trying to finish writing for about a year and a half that gives you the ability to make a whole bunch of easy changes to characters and specifically attributes, kind of like token mod does for tokens. There actually is what I call the unicorn light script, which is a snippet out in the forum that will let you do most of that already. What it lacks that character mod is going to be adding is a bunch of templated formatting for outputs. So you could say, for example, that you could whisper to the GM that someone's hit points decreased by 5, and you could say publicly that someone was healed, that sort of stuff.
Cool. Well, I think because I think the delay is longer than I think, that we're going to go ahead and call it here.
Okay.
That way we have time before the next show, just in case it is more than 20 minutes. So thank you guys for sticking with us throughout all of this, and we will figure it out eventually. And we appreciate you. So these two will be back at, I think it's 1 o'clock for Advanced Roll20 and Looking for Groups. So come back later. And I'm going to take us out and let you guys know.
Happy rolling.